so glad you're here at the Myriad Gardens on a beautiful day here on Saturday. I am Joel Bramhall. I'm the Director of Education, and we're very excited that we have Dale Spoonmore with us. How many people know Dale? A few people. Dale is kind of a local celebrity here. He's a gardening icon. Started his own backyard garden. And probably seen him on TV, and he's all over the internet. So very happy that Dale is here. He's taught a number of classes for us, and is really a great advocate for the gardens and for horticulture. So today is going to be broken down into about 3 sections. The first part, we'll start in the classroom, then we're going to go out to the children's garden. Dale set up a little activity area out there, and then we'll come back in for an activity with the smart pots, correct?
Yep.
So we're very happy that Dale's here. From Seed to Spoon is his famous app. If you don't have that on your phone, I'd encourage it. It's pretty awesome. Otherwise, if you have any questions, let me know. Restrooms are on the lower level. You can just go right outside this door here. Take the elevator to the stairs. There's a nice little lower lobby with restrooms. So if you have any questions, let me know. My name is Joel. So thank you for being here. Dale Spoonmore.
Hey everyone. Thank you for being here. This is awesome. I'm excited to talk about growing food today. So as he said, my name is Dale Spoonmore. This is my wife Carrie, and this is our backyard here. So back in 2015, this is where we started, and this is pretty much what it looks like now. We're always adjusting on it, but this is pretty much what it still looks like. So needless to say, we got obsessed. I'm autistic. I get obsessed with things, and this was my thing and still is. So we wanted to make an app to make it easy for other people to do this. And that's kind of where the idea from Seed to Spoon came from. So our app, we're going to dive into how our app helps you all through this class, but it is important to, if you want to participate in our contest we're doing at the end, go ahead and download it, because we're going to be using our app and asking some questions, and you got to find some information in there. We're going to show how easy it is to find things you're looking for. So if you search for From Seed to Spoon in the App Store, you should find it. If you search for gardening, it should be one of the top results for that too. You should be able to find it that way as well. We also have links on our website. So let's go ahead and dive into growing food and where to start and all of that. And Carrie's going to drive this presentation from her phone so we can show you where this information is in our app as well. But really everything starts with the soil. So obviously you're growing plants in the ground, right? So that's the most important part, is the soil. And there's a couple different ways you can get started. So you saw our raised beds we had that we built. Those work. We found those raised beds fall apart within about 4 years, at which point you've got to build another one or do something else. So we discovered these about a year into our gardening journey. And this really changed things for us. So these are fabric raised beds made out of felt, and these last a very long time. Our oldest ones are 4 years now. I've seen some that are 10 years old that still look great. And they're also portable. And really the biggest thing about these is they make it to where plants can get air through the sides in addition to just the top. So we're going to talk a lot about these today because we use them a lot. I'm a big believer in them. We don't get paid by them in any way, shape, or form. We sell them in our store, but that's just because I believe in them. So we're big believers in these. When I first saw them, I thought there's no way that's going to work in Oklahoma in the summer. It's going to get too hot. But it really has not been a problem at all. And when we found some really clever tricks on how to help with that. So in July, when it's 100 degrees outside, we'll take these 5-gallon smart pots or 10-gallon ones, and we'll set them inside of a kiddie pool with a couple inches of water, and then they soak up water from below. And like I mentioned, plants are able to get air from the side as well. So they're basically supercharged. Normally plants are only able to get oxygen from above. And whenever plants are able to get oxygen from all sides, they're able to go faster and healthier. It's just like a car. You put more oxygen into it, it's going to have more horsepower. It's the same basic thing with your plants. Now, it does require a little more water. Because it's going through more oxygen, it requires water to do all the processes related to oxygen. So anyway, we're going to be talking a lot about these, but let's talk about now like what you fill these with, right? Because that's really the most important part, is the soil that you're growing in. Because if you don't have good soil, it doesn't matter what you try and do, you're going to have a lot of problems. So we're actually going to be going outside here in a little bit, and I'm going to show you how we make our own soil mix. But I'm going to talk about it here, then when we get out there you understand what we're doing. So you can buy soil mix like this. This is good stuff, but it's going to cost you a lot of money if you want to fill a bunch of garden beds with this stuff. And it's not really a sustainable or scalable way to start gardening. So you can make your own by combining 3 basic ingredients. The first one is peat moss. We buy that in these big bags at Home Depot or Lowe's. We've got one out there that you can see. It's like $12 for that. We use vermiculite, which is this coarse rock. If you look in potting mix and you see the little white flakes in here, that's vermiculite or perlite. And what this does is it helps regulate moisture, so it soaks water in and it releases it slowly. And then the third ingredient, which is the most important, is compost. So we get our compost from a variety of places, and it's important to make sure that you're mixing compost from a variety of places. And the reason for that is because compost is the food for the plants. So if you think about your diet, if you have nothing but hamburgers every single day, eventually you're going to have a nutrient deficiency in somewhere, probably in some leafy greens, right? It's the same thing with plants. So if the compost that you give them is made from cow manure, and that's the only compost that you use, then your plants are going to be missing some of the nutrients that come from compost that's made with vegetable scraps. So what we try and do is get a mix of compost from a variety of places. And when you first hear that you need compost from like 5 places, you're going to be like, where am I going to get that? Whatever. And that's how I felt too, but it's not as hard as you think. Minute Materials here in Oklahoma City, I found them to be a really good resource. They have 3 types of compost right there, and they just added a 4th that comes from the zoo. So you can get compost from elephants, which is pretty cool. So you can get 4 there. And then Markham's Nursery has a compost. It's called Redbud Compost. It's pretty expensive, so I don't really buy a lot of that, but it is good stuff. But really with compost, what we started doing is making it ourselves. So we actually have a guide on our website, on our blog, that walks you through how to make your own compost. It's really simple. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it here. You can check out our blog. Yes, question, go ahead.
The name of the website?
Yeah, so the name of our website, it's seed2spoon.net is our website, and our app is called From Seed to Spoon. And you can get to our website from our app, and our app's available on both iOS, Android, and we also have a web version as well that you can use from like a Kindle Fire or something like that that doesn't have access to the App Store. You can use that from any device. So, so compost is the most important part of the soil mix. Don't skimp. Don't buy bad compost unless it's from a nursery. Like the compost we got was from Markham's Nursery. It was a Redbud compost. They bagged it like a few weeks ago, and now they're selling it. That's okay. But if you go to like one of these big box stores and they've got compost that comes from wherever, that compost has been in that bag for a long time. It is completely dead. There's no life in that compost anymore. You're just wasting your money. So I would not spend money on compost that comes from one of those places. So basically you just mix those 3 ingredients together, and then you fill your raised bed or your smart pot or whatever you want to do as far as that's concerned. I'm not going to talk a lot about growing directly in the ground, because in Oklahoma that can be a tough thing to start doing for beginners, because you've got to get rid of Bermuda first. And that's, most people just don't eat, that's a stop for most people. Now what we did was our first year, we completely covered our backyard in cardboard and then a foot of wood chips. And this is called the Back to Eden gardening method, if you want to read more about the science behind this and all of it works. But basically, the idea was we were out at Thunderbird one day, we were hiking. We like to do that a lot. And we had just like had a frustrating gardening experience. I don't remember what it was, but something wasn't growing right. And I'm walking around surrounded by all these plants that are just doing great, and no one's doing anything to take care of them. I'm like, what is going, like, okay, we're overcomplicating this. And I started just like digging around the ground, like looking at the soil, and it was amazing. The soil everywhere. If you're out in the forest sometime, just look at the soil. There's like 6 inches of just like super loose, like it's just amazing soil. So basically the idea was we're gonna do that in our backyard. So we're just going to cover our backyard in a bunch of wood chips and leaves and stuff like that, right? And then once I started Googling, I found the Back to Eden method and learned more about how it works. And so that's what we did our first year. And now our soil in the entire backyard is just gold. So we have these raised beds that are scattered all around. And now we're starting to go in and plant just directly in the wood chips all around there with perennial food sources. So we've got our raised beds that we use for greens and for annual things like tomatoes and peppers that are gonna, die off when the winter hits. But for everything else, like our fruit bushes and our fruit trees and oregano and thyme and rosemary and all these other things that are perennial, we just have them scattered all around the garden. So let me do a quick time check and see, because we need to get out there to start mixing our soil in here about 15 minutes. So I want to cover more of the basics though before we go out there, and then we'll come back in here and then we'll kind of dive into how to start growing specific foods. Okay, so those are the key basics. Now, you also really need to consider sunlight. This is something I did not do a good job of when I first started. I built my first raised beds like directly beside a fence that was on the south side of it. So it meant that bed didn't get any sun from like November to March because it was shaded. Because I never fully understood how the sun worked, which I felt silly about. So if you don't know how the sun works, like I didn't, learn how the sun works. And then you really need to think about like how the sun is going to affect it in different times. So if it's an area that you want to grow year round, you need to consider that. But at the same time, you also need to consider, based on what you want to grow, and this is where our app will come in and help you understand. We'll get to that in a minute. But some plants do not like heat at all. They will completely just like say, I'm out of here once it gets hot, and they produce seeds and they're done. So one way that you can grow plants like that when it does get hot here is put them in a location that gets shade from like noon on, which is the east side of your house. So you need to think about sun strategically and where your gardens are going to be located. Also, some trees you can't grow under, like walnut trees. The toxin from the seeds makes it to where nothing will grow in that area. So, yeah, so you got to really consider, that kind of stuff. Also, if it's a flood-prone area, you probably don't want to put your garden there because plants don't like to be sitting in water. Now, these smart pots can make that kind of handy because they can just kind of sit there and then soak up the water, and then they help regulate some of that. So, okay, so that's location. We've got the container. We've talked about soil. Okay, let's go make our own soil mix and show you how easy it is to do that. Then we're going to come back over here, and then we'll dive into, and we're going to talk about as many foods as we can before I run out of time. So that's basically the plan. So let's head on over there.
Avoid that area.
Okay. So this is the second to largest size smart pot. This is the Big Bag Bag Junior. It's 50 gallons. I don't remember price off the top of my head. I think it's like $30. But I really like this size because although it takes some effort, they can be moved. It's not too bad. The big bag beds, you're not moving those once they get filled. It's like, they're very difficult to move. So, what's that?
Proper planning.
Yes, yeah, and like our big bag beds, we really like those for potatoes, for strawberries, for things that are not moving. But for anything that might move, and even this is kind of tough to move. So like, we've really started migrating more towards like the 25 gallons with handles, so we can move those around easily, and we really like those. Okay, so let's get to filling these. So I'll help you out. You want to get that bucket, and we'll fill one bucket with vermiculite. I'm probably gonna dump this everywhere. All right. And then we get a bucket of compost.
No, you're good.
And then bucket of peat moss. We're just gonna spill some, I think.
Yeah. Pretty much the only thing we can.
Now, I mean, technically, I think that we should be wearing like yeah, you really don't want this getting in your lungs. I didn't plan that very well.
Well, it's mainly the vermiculite that you're worried about.
Yeah, and what we'll do typically is we'll have like a water hose as we're mixing this, and Carrie will be spraying it down and spraying me.
Mm-hmm.
As,
I do.
If you have the opportunity.
I know.
I deserve it because I get her all the time. But basically what we'll do is as I'm going through and mixing this, she will just be spraying it. And what you're left with, if anyone wants to come up and kind of see what this mixture is like, feel free to come on up and check it out.
That's pretty much
So-
a bag of potting soil, pre-mixed potting soil.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's all there is to it. So this is our base that we start with, and then we add a little bit of fertilizer, a little bit of worm castings to that. I've got that in the classroom. We'll show that. Yeah, we have a worm bin too, and we'll talk about that. But I wanted to show y'all how easy.
Always just 1 to 1 to 1.
Yes, now I will say vermiculite's expensive. You can back down on it if you need to.
Okay.
So back down to like 15% vermiculite. Because especially in the beginning, like we didn't know if we wanted a garden, how serious we were going to be, and I didn't want to spend $1,000 on vermiculite, so we backed down on that. Now you will notice a difference. Like the plants aren't going to hold moisture as well. Like it's worth it to go ahead and put the vermiculite in there. But if you need to back down on something, That's the thing to back down on. And then once we get the mix together too, I usually throw at least a couple buckets of compost, extra compost in there on top, just for good measure, and to make sure the top like 6 inches is pretty saturated with compost, because that's where the plant's roots are mostly, right? So, so that's the way, and we just, like, we'll spend one Saturday and just fill like 20 of these in just the whole day and burn like 3,000 calories on our Apple Watches, and it's pretty awesome. So, yeah, so yeah, that's a great question. So what we do is we fill it to about here, and then we leave room so we can put mulch. So we use mulch in the fringe season, or in the summer we use mulch. Now the mulch we use changes. So it starts off with leaves. That's the first mulch we use. We do a base of leaves, and then we do wood chips on top of that. Couple reasons. Number one, wood chips can leach nitrogen from soil. It's very small ratios, but enough that I do it. And then two, like worms and stuff really like those leaves. So they'll come up and start breaking those down, and it just helps things. So we'll just add in wood chips as it gets hotter. So, and you'll notice a huge difference. We have a video on our YouTube that shows a smart pot that was mulch versus one that wasn't. And we took temperature readings at the base of the plant, and it was like 170, where like that was the difference. It was like a 30-degree difference between mulch. So it makes a huge difference. All right, and we're not gonna finish all this. I think y'all get the idea of how easy it is to make your own soil mix. Let's go ahead and go back inside, and we'll talk about how to grow food. And we're actually in those, you guys get to all plant your own in that 3-gallon today too. Yes? This is only available at nurseries. So we got this at Markham's Nursery, but TLC is the cheapest place we found. Please do not buy vermiculite at a store. It's gonna be like in this size bag for that price. It is TLC or Markham's, and just shop around, call the nurseries and see. TLC is the best price I've seen lately though. All right, let's head on back over and we'll talk about how to grow specific things now. That got us cooled down a little bit, right? Got us outside and cooled down. Okay, so let's start talking about how to grow specific things now. And like I said, I'm just gonna run through as many as I can before I run out of time. If you have specific ones that you don't hear, we can start throwing them out as suggestions, and we can go through that. So our app, I haven't really gone through it too much, so let's show it. This is what we're gonna be using to show the different plants you can grow. So we have 100 different fruits, herbs, and vegetables that are in the app. If you aren't sure where to start or what you want to grow, that's where this comes in. So we started growing to help with anxiety and depression. Panic attacks have driven my life until I started gardening, basically. And gardening was the first thing in my life that actually helped me with them. So that's why we made this app. We wanted to make it easy for other people to have that same experience that I did. And that's where this comes in. This is all Carrie's idea. She's a nurse, and this was all hers. So this lets you choose from 26 different health conditions or health-related reasons for growing. And whenever you tap on one of them, it filters the plant list down to show you what helps with that. So let's choose mental health and start there. That's where I started. So this gave us kind of a framework of the different things we could start with to help with that. So kale and spinach are high in magnesium and calcium, which are two things that you can eat a lot of to help with anxiety and depression. So those are two of the things we started with. So let's go ahead and start with those. I wasn't talking to you. Okay, so let's start with kale. So, and this fits right now too. Let's go seasonally. I think that'd be an easy way to do this. So right now, you can start kale, spinach, lettuce outdoors from seed. You can take these seeds, throw them on the ground. You're gonna have food in like a month. And we're gonna be doing that in these smart pots here at the end. Kale is really easy to grow. So you can start it just directly from seed outside. If you want to get a head start, you can go to nurseries right now and buy little kale transplants that look about this size and go ahead and transplant them now. Assuming we don't get like a freeze next week, it's looking like the long-term models for March are indicating it's going to be warmer. So, but kale comes from Russia. So once it's developed, it doesn't care about the cold. Our kale survived all winter because we planted it in November. And it went dormant through the winter, hung out, and now it's come back alive and producing a bunch. So kale is full of a ton of nutrients. If we look at the planting dates here, I guess technically we're within that date we have there. So I thought we were a little early on it, but we're right in range. This will show you planting dates that are calculated based on your nearest weather station. So we have a database of every weather station in the country. We take your position, find your closest one, and then we have the last 100 years worth of freeze data from that weather station that we use to calculate the most probable last freeze date. Now, last year we were off by like 2 days, so it's not gonna be perfect, but it should be a pretty good range, and it matches what the packet, or what the back of the packets of the seed says, because every packet will say like 4 to 6 weeks before the last spring frost or something like that, so that's what we're going off of. So these dates change based on where you are. You can also go set them manually, so if for some reason you can also set your dates manually. Can you go ahead and tap on that for a second, Carrie? Oh, you're in there. Cool. Thank you. You can set custom frost dates. So sometimes people email us and be like, it's not April 11th, it's April 9th. And I'm like, okay, you'll change it right there. I wrote that after an email one day we got about it. I was like, I'm just gonna go fix this. So that lets you set your own frost dates, and then it recalculates everything based off of that. Okay, so let's go back into the plant details for kale. And if we keep scrolling down, it's going to show you all the information about that plant. So this is the growing season. There's cool, warm, or perennial. There's frost tolerance. So this survives a hard freeze. There's light frost, and then there's tender. Those are the 3 options there. Number per square. So Square Foot Gardening is the first gardening book that I bought, and it really helped me understand plant spacing in a way that the whole like row method just didn't make sense to me because it seemed like a lot of wasted space. So Square Foot Gardening was designed by a former engineer. And basically the idea is this. You take every square foot of your garden, you divide it into squares, and then every plant has a certain number that can be planted per square. So kale is 1 per square, so you would just put 1 seed in the middle. Now for kale, I grow it a little bit differently because we grow it more as a microgreen. So I'll sprinkle this whole thing full of seeds, and I'll thin it down to that 1. So I don't just put 1 seed in the middle and that's just all that's there in that square the whole time. So some of these plants, like there's a strategy to it. But for tomatoes, it's not that way. I'm not growing tomatoes as microgreens. These are just things you can eat as microgreens. We'll get into microgreens more in a minute. But that's what this number per square is. So this is a seeding square device. It's made from a couple in Canada. They're super awesome people, and this device really helps out, especially in the beginning. If you have kids, this is awesome. We taught our 2-year-old her colors and her numbers. And all that kind of stuff from this thing. So especially if you have OCD, I really like this because I want everything to be spaced perfectly. So that's Square Foot Gardening. Container size, this is referencing the right smart pot for that size. So we've started to shift away from growing things in like raised beds and more of growing things in individual smart pots for a couple different reasons. Number 1, it makes it easy to move them indoors if we have a random spring storm. The first time that we had a broccoli plant get destroyed by a hailstorm, I almost cried. It was horrible. So no more of that if you just grow in here. Same with tomatoes and peppers. We always get that like random March 29th super cold day, that kills a lot of stuff or stunts their growth. So this eliminates a lot of that, frustration. And then 2, in the summer, it's super convenient to be able to sit them in a kiddie pool with water before I go to work. And I know that my tomato's not going to get, too hot. Now, I do want to specify and caveat here that if you just leave it filled in a thing with water all the time, that's going to cause problems. So you have to make sure that it's getting a chance to dry out too. You don't want to just let it live in water. That's going to cause mold issues and root rot and all sorts of issues. So in our kiddie pools, we typically drill a hole like 1 inch up. That way it's not possible for it to be too high of water. And then the plant itself will just soak that up. And we're typically filling it like every 3 days. We're just filling that kiddie pool up till it starts leaking out, and then we're good to go.
Sorry. Uh-oh. I'll try unplugging and plugging it back in.
Is the light going on?
I don't know.
Okay, do you all have your phone on you? Let's pull it out and I'll just go through it, and if you could follow along, we'll do that and we'll see if we can get that working. All right, so below container size, we have sprout to harvest. You all see this is light blue one.
70 to 80 days.
Yeah, so this shows you how many days it will take for that to produce food from the time it sprouts until harvest, right? So it's not from like the time you plant the seed. If you plant the seed, you've got to add the number of days that it takes to, and all this adding stuff, we're going to make real simple with Garden Plus that we show here in a second, because it's going to do all that for you. But that's what that number means here, the sprout to harvest. Sun requirements, I mentioned earlier that some plants don't like full sun, or don't like to be in the sun. Like this shows you what that plant likes. We have water requirements, which every plant is different in how much water it likes. And some things can be a little tricky. Like beans have a specific watering pattern they like that when they're producing fruit or when they're not. And then fertilizing. Every plant too has different fertilizer requirements. So this gives you all the information you need about how to grow that food in one place. And then we have all the information about how to plant it. So the best way to plant it. Some things do not like to be transplanted. Carrots and beets and things that grow roots, root crops, do not like to be transplanted. It'll stunt their growth and you're not going to get good carrots off of it. So this shows you what that plant likes. And some plants can go either way, seed or transplant too. This is the depth, so how deep you plant the seed, how many days it should take for it to sprout, how tall it's going to be, which is important because if you're planting your garden, you don't want things to be hidden from the shade or shaded out from the sun. And then the family, which is important because you don't want to grow two members of the same family back to back in the same place. You want to rotate. So that's where some of that data comes in. And then we show you when to harvest and how to harvest. It's not always obvious, when the right time to harvest something is. How to cook it and eat it, and we have a link to our recipes here. So we produce a lot of recipes. Carrie is always releasing a new blog post with a recipe or something. Brooklyn in the back here has a recipe on, she has her headphones in, she can't even hear me, on how to make guacamole. Okay, so, and then we have seed saving information, if you're into that, how to do that. And then we have links to products that we believe in. So the only things that we link to in our store are things we've used ourselves or things we can vouch for. And right now we link to some things on Amazon and some things are in our own store. So our goal is to make it to where we don't link to Amazon anymore, and we have relationships with all these vendors, and we've got about half of them moved over now. So we launched our own store last week where y'all can buy directly from us. Only things, and our model for the store is the Apple model. If you go to the Apple store, everything in there is high quality, and they filter it for you. So you know that if you go in there, you're going to get something that's nice. We want our store to be the same way. So we're only going to carry things that we believe in that work well. All right, let's go back up to the top and look at this types tab. So this is where you can see all the different types that Burpee has. So Burpee is one of the largest seed companies in the country, and we have an integration with them where we pull in their database of seeds, and then you can see how many days to maturity it is, and then maybe if it's like one that's does really well up in the north or in the south, or like tomatoes, it has different ones like that. Let's go back up to the top and look at friends. So this shows you all of the plants that grow well next to that plant. So you can tap on that plant to go in. So this helps you with your companion planting. If you are in a raised bed, you can know what to put next to each thing. And then also, we have a list of what to avoid planting next to it. So some plants do not like other things next to them. And this is a place where you can go see what to avoid planting next to each other. And then we have the pests that attack that plant. So this shows you the most common pests for that plant. We have pictures, and if there's a cutworm has like a larva and an adult stage, you can see at a glance what it is you're looking for. And then you can tap on it, so let's tap on aphids, and you can read about how to handle that with organic treatments. So we don't use any pesticide in our garden. We've been able to figure out how to handle most every pest, aside from squash bugs. Squash bugs are still very difficult, but we still don't use pesticide for them, but most every other pest can be handled pretty easily. So with aphids, you can buy ladybugs on Amazon. If that doesn't take care of the problem, you can make a soap, like just an insecticidal soap. You can buy it, or you can just make it yourself. Lace wings also, you can buy them on Amazon. They help with aphids. So we've collected all the best stuff we found and put it in one place. You can also see, if you discover you have an aphid problem on one plant, it's probably other places too. So if you tap on that, it'll show you the other plants you should go check to see what else may have it. And then also we have a blog and a YouTube channel that we're always putting out new information about this stuff and showing stuff that's going on in our garden. So this will show you everything that is related to aphids. So like what I was talking about earlier about, actually let me talk about this for a second. So this video here talks about how on okra, we were able to see that there was an aphid problem just by the ants around the plant, because ants will farm aphids. So if you see a huge ant mound around your garden, there's a good chance that there's an aphid infestation nearby, because they will carry aphids to where they need to go, put them there, and then literally farm them because they eat the stuff that aphids produce. And they'll protect them from predators, and it's crazy. They literally farm them. It's so cool. I watched them one day for like an hour. This is what I do when I get tired of staring at a computer. I just go stare at ants, and my 2-year-old's next to me, and we're just like, that's so cool. And so, all right, so let's go back to the kale page and go to the More tab on this. So again, just like with pests, we also have blog posts that are about each plant, so this shows you there. Okay, so let's dive into more plants. Now that you kind of get the lay of the land of how to use our app, let's dive into more specific plants. So let's go to spinach next, because it is also a great time to plant spinach. Any of those leafy greens, the spring is going to be a good time to plant them. Now, I will say that the heavier the leaf, the tougher the leaf, the earlier you start it. So kale and spinach have tough leaves. They can handle the cold better. Lettuce is a little wimpier when it comes to the cold. But some lettuces have tougher leaves. So that's an easy way to kind of understand what goes when. So we just kind of plant in waves, starting with kale and spinach is the first thing, and then lettuce. Spinach and kale and lettuce are all grown pretty similarly, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on all that. Y'all know where to go find all the details on it now. But that's kind of the first wave, and then alongside that, we also do our root crops. So early spring is a great time to start things like carrots and beets and turnips and radishes. Let's go to carrots for a second. And carrots are one of the plants that we always use this for, because they're 16 per square. So it's just one every red hole. And whenever it was me just trying to do it in a line before, I had to stop because my OCD spiraled and I got frustrated. So yeah, exactly. So this thing is awesome for carrots. Two, carrots really like, I mean, this should be obvious, but carrots like loose soil. So especially if you're making a bag for carrots, make sure you don't skimp on vermiculite too much, because that really helps it stay loose. Deeper containers also work better for smart pots. I mean, for carrots. We have these big long beds that are made by smart pots that they're like this tall, and they're 12 feet long, and they're this wide. And those are really good for carrots, kind of in the middle of that bed. And then we do like peas on the side that grow up a trellis and all of that. Okay, so I talked about peas. Let's go ahead and dive in and talk about peas, because it's also the right time to plant peas right now. Peas are a vining crop. So they grow about 4 feet tall, vine up, and then produce a bunch of peas. You can grow them just like along a fence. So just a chain link fence even is a great place to grow them. What we do is we make these cattle panel trellises. So Tractor Supply has 14-foot cattle panels for like $18, and you can arch them over and make an arch. And then you have T-posts that hold the arch in place. I think we've got a picture of it. Yeah,
I have
cool.
a video.
Yeah, so this is a video that kind of shows it.
Oh, sorry.
Well, it's just.
I was going to try and.
You can see. So this T-post, we just stake in the ground, and then we zip tie the cattle panel trellis to that T-post. So that's a really easy way to make a trellis, and it's nice because we'll have the.
Sorry, do you want me to go back?
No, that's fine. We'll have the big long beds on the inside of that trellis and on the outside. So on one side, we're growing greens that like shade in the summer. So by the time that stuff gets tall and it's creating shade, well, there's greens under it that need shade anyway. Well, we also grow kiwi on that. You can grow kiwi in Oklahoma. We grow a lot of our vining crops just along that. So let's go back to peas for a second and talk about peas, because peas are a super important crop for us, not only because of the food they produce, but because of the way they help other plants. So we've talked a little bit about companion planting and how plants help each other. Let's dive in a little bit there. Peas are one of the few plants that can take nitrogen out of the air and store it down in the soil. And that's important because nitrogen is the most important nutrient for plants to grow, basically. And peas and beans are basically, there's a couple other plants, but those are the main food crops that do that. So it's really convenient to plan your crops around that idea. So if you have a crop that needs a lot of nitrogen, like spinach, for example, anything that grows a bunch of green leaves is going to need a lot of nitrogen. You can plan that to grow right after your peas. Or you can grow your peas right next to it, so that nitrogen kind of leaches over from the peas into the other stuff. So we pretty much have peas, or beans going year round. And there's a pattern to how we do it. So we start with peas and pretty much now. We started peas a few weeks ago. We'll start peas in February once we're not in the middle of a freeze, and we'll do every 2 weeks until about April 15th or so, and then we'll switch over to beans. Beans and peas are in the same family and grow very similarly, but peas don't like the heat as much. So we switch to beans around April. We'll plant those every 2 weeks until we hit May, and then in May we switch to southern peas, black-eyed peas. They like the heat. So we plant those in May, and then we stop planting peas altogether in June and July, and then in August we come back to peas again. August we come back to beans again, and then we go back down to peas once we hit like September. So there's a pattern of having those year round. And it's nice because they produce a ton of food, especially if you're planting them every 2 weeks like we're doing, because they're gonna produce like a bunch at once, and then maybe a couple more rounds, then they're gonna die back. So you gotta phase them to happen over time. But we have those going pretty much year round. Other stuff that we're planting in the spring are perennial food sources. So fruit bushes and fruit trees. Right now is a great time to plant them, and honestly we're running out of time. Like if you get too deep into March, it's almost too late because the plants need at least a couple months to get their roots developed before the heat hits, or that heat's going to be really hard on them. So the best time to plant a fruit bush or fruit tree technically in Oklahoma is going to be like early fall, so they have all winter to develop. But the second best time is early spring. So we're planting all of those right now. The easiest fruit bushes to grow in Oklahoma are blackberries. That's because they're native to here. They grow wild everywhere. So, and once you plant one, you will have a bunch. They will take over your yard in a good way. We like it. You can find thornless varieties. We got ours at Markham's Nursery. It was called the Ouachita variety. And there's other thornless varieties out there too, but make sure you get the thornless ones because they are going to grow a bunch, and it's going to be a pain if you're fighting them. Yeah, blackberries are awesome, and you get a ton of them off of each plant. Blueberries also do well here. Now you need to adjust the soil a little bit, and there's not a lot of things where you have to adjust the soil on, but blueberries are one of them. They like an acidic soil, and our soil here is typically a little alkaline, especially if you're making it with a bunch of compost and all that kind of stuff. So you can buy soil acidifier at any store, basically, and just follow the directions. It'll have how much you use per the size of the container. And then for those bushes, we like to do the really big smart pots for those, like 20, 25 gallons. That way there's a ton of room for them, and we've got the handles and all that too. So we're typically just leaving those outside through the winter. But if we do get like a sudden cold snap in the winter, because Oklahoma can be tough on plants sometimes. Plants are accustomed to it getting cold. That's no problem. The problem for plants is when it's 80, 0, 80, 0, and it's like, what do I do when it...
All those memes about Oklahoma, it's like, yep, you do you.
Yeah, and it takes a while for the plant to develop its ability to fight off cold. So when it just happens overnight, it doesn't get a chance. So we'll help our plants out in those situations, like our rosemary, for example. Rosemary typically does fine in Oklahoma in the winter, but if we have those back and forths, we'll just bring it inside. Okay, so that pretty much covers the fruit bushes. If you want to learn more about other specific fruit bushes, just go check out the app. Raspberries are also really easy to grow. There's also a lot of berries you may not have heard of, like boysenberries and gooseberries and all sorts of stuff. So we are just now getting to the point where we're starting to plant a lot of those. I wish we would have planted more in the beginning because it's really nice to have food that just comes back every year that you don't have to do anything for. We're trying to build a food forest so that it's just not something we have to go manage all the time. It's just something that's always producing food. I mentioned rosemary. It's also a great time to plant all the herbs. So this is rosemary here. We love growing herbs for a variety of reasons. Number one is I've mentioned companion planting a few times. Herbs really help with other plants because they repel pests for other plants. And the way that works is I'll pass this around and just kind of get a whiff of that plant. I mean, it's super strong, and this is just in the middle of a room without the heat on it. As soon as the sun hits that and it starts to get hot, those oils get released up into the air, and if you're just walking by that plant, you smell it. The reason why that's important is because bugs find what they're looking for essentially through their sense of smell. There are different chemicals that get put up in the air whenever plants are under stress or whenever, there's this whole world happening out there involving chemicals that get put up in the air, and that plant makes it hard for bugs to smell what's going on because that overwhelms their senses. Same thing with mint and other plants like that too. So if you surround your tomato plant with a bunch of basil and a bunch of rosemary and oregano, then it's going to make it hard for the pests that are looking for that tomato plant to find it. That's basically the idea of how that works. So we have rosemary, oregano, thyme, cilantro, basil. We have herbs everywhere throughout our garden, basically just scattered everywhere. A number of these plants too, oregano has been proven to improve the flavor of stuff that's grown next to it. Basil improves the flavor of tomatoes when it's grown next to it. So these plants have evolved beside each other for millions of years to help each other out. So that's why the companions part in our app is so valuable, because there are so many combinations to remember. That's why we wanted to make the app, because we had spreadsheets before. And I could never remember, okay, what should I not plant to this? And I was always making mistakes. So I still got to go back and remind myself of these, because I can't remember every companion for every plant. I remember what to avoid because I made those mistakes, but it's just a lot to remember.
Which tomatoes do you guys have the best luck with?
So the easiest tomatoes to grow in Oklahoma are the smaller ones, the cherry tomatoes.
I'm looking for
For the
medium size.
Yeah, so for the medium-sized ones, the determinants have been more successful for us, like the Romas and stuff like that for salsas. If you're going to grow the indeterminate ones, then like the big slicing tomatoes and stuff like that, then you just got to make sure you're staying on top of watering. Also, I would give them some shade in the afternoon. So if you don't have a wall next to you already, then you can make a shade wall really easy by putting 2 T-posts in the ground. You can buy 8-foot T-posts at Tractor Supply. And then they have these hardware remesh panels that you can buy at Home Depot or Lowe's for $8. And they're used when you're pouring concrete and you lay them on the ground and it holds the concrete together. But you can take those and zip tie them to those 2 T-posts. And now you can grow beans or something up them and put them on the west side of where your tomatoes are going to be. So now those beans are going to take the sun and they're going to produce shade for your tomato. If you don't want to do that, you can put shade cloth on the T-post too. That works too. It just feels like wasted space. But
Okay, I'll try a different kind of tomato because they do get shade in the afternoon. I was wondering if that was a problem.
no, I mean,
Okay.
pretty much everything is going to appreciate shade in the afternoon. Okra and basil are the 2 exceptions. You can throw as much sun on them as you want. There's also other varieties. Juliet is a variety that we've had good success with. I'll tell you where to go. The Oklahoma Gardening group on Facebook is a wealth of information about tomatoes, because it's just pretty much people talking tomatoes all day sometimes.
In other years,
Yeah.
it just depends on the rain.
And there's a lady on there named Dawn Coyle that has grown 200 times the tomatoes in Oklahoma, and you can have a conversation with her, and she remembers all 200. And I've had a very long conversation with her about tomatoes. Yes, she is awesome. That group, I learned a lot from that group when I first started, which I encourage everyone, reach out. The internet's a great place. We have a group too. It's called From Seed to Spoon. It's on Facebook. You can join there and post your questions and we'll help you out. And there's a lot of other people that we've recruited to help out as well. Okay, so let's jump into more plants. Still got more time.
Dale, when you began, you said now kale, spinach, and one other.
Lettuce. Yeah, those are the main 3 greens. Now there's other greens too that you may not be accustomed to. I mean, I certainly didn't know anything about Swiss chard before we started growing food. And now I love it because we use this as a tortilla replacement. So these leaves get really big and they're really tough, meaning if you fill them with rice and beans and chicken, they're not going to just all fall out. And I don't really like the flavor of Swiss chard by itself, but you just get a hint of it whenever you eat it and all that stuff. And this is loaded with some of the highest amount of nutrients you can find, and especially this bright lights variety produces red leaves and purple and yellow and all these colors you're not really getting in your diet. And when it comes to your diet, getting as many different colors as possible is super important because that's all the different nutrients you're getting. So just check out our app. We have a lot of stuff in here that mustard greens. I'd never grown mustard or seen a mustard green before. I just thought I thought mustard was just the condiment. I had no idea where it came from. Well, Carrie hates mustard, but I love it. And especially on a hamburger. So what I've done now is instead of putting mustard on my hamburger, I just get a couple mustard leaves and put that on my burger. And now I get the mustard flavor and greens, and it's incredible. So that's one thing I want to mention a little bit. Was when we first started growing food, we had an idea of what these plants were. Let's talk about broccoli because we haven't talked about that yet. I thought broccoli was something that grew this big, giant tree-like thing, and you ate it because that's all I'd ever seen from the store. I bought frozen broccoli from the store, and it was in that, and that's all I thought broccoli was. And then that health storm I mentioned earlier. So first I felt like crying for a little bit once my plant got destroyed. Then I went on the Oklahoma gardening group and I complained about it. And then it was probably Dawn or some other lady said, well, why don't you just eat the stuff that got knocked off? I was like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, the entire plant's edible. And that blew my mind. I was like, are you kidding me? So those leaves, everything, the entire part of the broccoli plant is edible. So once we realized that and understood it, we changed the way we thought about broccoli. So instead of trying to grow this giant broccoli head that takes 90 to 120 days of temperatures less than 85 degrees and no hailstorms and no bugs attacking it and everything else, which can be difficult to do, we started growing varieties of broccoli that produce a bunch of smaller side shoots in like 60 days. It's much more convenient. We're getting way more off of it. And turns out we like eating this form of broccoli more because it pretty much tastes like, so when you harvest broccoli like this and you have like all the leaves and stuff and you chop it all up and you stir fry it, it tastes just like the inside of an egg roll. Because that's basically what the inside of an egg roll is cabbage, which is in the same family as broccoli. And as soon as I tasted it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Why have I been doing having to steam it and all the other stuff? So that's our primary way of eating broccoli now, is just stir frying a bunch of mix of heads and leaves and all of it. Another thing I'll say about broccoli is that it is probably the best microgreen you can grow. So I've mentioned microgreens a couple times. Let's dig into what that means and what it is. So basically, a microgreen is any plant that you are harvesting at like this stage, like a month old. Now, why would you do that? Let's dive into that. So whenever a seed is just naturally in the ground, it has a ton of nutrition in it already. And that's how it makes a giant plant. It's got a ton of stuff stored in it, right? The idea is that whenever you take a seed and then you let it sprout and then it goes through a couple rounds of photosynthesis, now it's got even more nutrition in there because those rounds of photosynthesis inject some new stuff into it. So now you've got all the nutrition of that entire plant basically boiled down into this one tiny plant. So if you let that plant grow full size, it's still going to have all the nutrition, but that is spread out across the whole plant, right? So you've basically got to eat that whole plant to get everything that plant had. Well, now, in this stage, you've got everything in a small package. So what we do is do you have the picture pulled up? Great, awesome. Can you scroll down a little bit and let's show? So we have these trays. They're just 10 by 20 trays. I'm sure you've seen them. And then we fill that with seed starting mix and we sprinkle a ton of seeds, like 1,000 seeds over everywhere. And then put that under grow lights. And then they sprout and they get about that big. Just baby little plants. And then they're sprouts. You've seen sprouts before. This is all this is. It's all sprouts are microgreens. And then we use those in like a wrap. Like we like to make knockoff Cool Greens wraps a lot because I love that place. So she figured out their couscous. Yeah, look at that. I love that. Love that, her recipe on that stuff. So we put them in burritos and in quesadillas. We put them in everywhere because it's just a little microdose of a ton of nutrition, which is the whole point of why we're doing all of this, because I don't want to have panic attacks. Well, just doing that, like every other day, helps keep those away. So this is a great way to grow broccoli is in microgreens. If you don't already have like a station set up or grow lights, it can be kind of intimidating sounding. We have a video that shows how we made ours for less than $100 just from stuff from Craigslist and stuff we had sitting around the house, basically. And you can also buy like kits on Amazon that are just like one little grow light, so you can start small. But even if you just have one tray of microgreens, one tray, well, you'll have microgreens in 2 or 3 weeks, and it'll last you like a week. So if you get one, and then maybe you get a rotation of 2 going, now you got enough. And then, so that's also great in the winter, because we have food we're eating all winter that's being grown out of our garden, if you will. For the seed starting mix, we make it basically the exact same way as what you saw out there, except no compost. The reason for that is the seeds don't need food. They've got everything they need in that little package. They don't really need food until they get like 6 weeks old, depending on it, but they definitely don't need food then. And the compost could potentially, if there was something in there, now you've got to make sure you clean the microgreens really well. Like it just, whenever you're dealing with just peat moss and vermiculite, it's pretty sterile stuff. So you don't really have to be too concerned about anything like that. Okay, so we talked about broccoli. Another thing that's kind of along the same lines as broccoli, Brussels sprouts. I'd never eaten at all until we started growing them. They're tougher to grow in Oklahoma because they take a lot of time, but if you've never had fresh Brussels sprouts and you've only had stuff out of a can or something, just try it because it's really good. Okay, so let's go to some other families of plants now. scroll through for a second. Okay, so basically at this point in time, we're talking about like mid-April. We've talked about everything that leads us up until April. So now let's start talking about the stuff you're going to start doing in April. And some of that stuff starts now. So if you want tomatoes or peppers, then you need to either start seeds now or 2 weeks ago, or just buy them from a nursery or something like that. And that's what we do with a lot of our tomatoes and peppers, is I go to the farmer's market, and again, there's a lady there that knows everything about tomatoes, and these tomatoes are her babies, and she has been taking care of them way better than Lowe's has with their plants for the past month. And so that's where I go pretty much all my transplants for tomatoes and peppers, is whatever farmer's market you go to, I promise you there's someone in there that has been growing tomatoes for a very long time that has babies that they've been taking care of. So that's what I like to do for those. Once you get your tomato plant or your pepper plant, again, we like to grow those in smart pots too because they're portable. So if you have it just in one place out in the garden and then we get one of those May hailstorms, then you're gonna have a tough time trying to keep that thing protected. There's two different types of tomatoes. So I mentioned determinate and indeterminate earlier. Let me talk about that a little bit more. So determinate tomatoes grow to like 3 or 4 feet tall and then put out all their tomatoes at once. Those are great for salsa, for any type of like tomato you want to preserve, salsa, like sauce, anything like that. The other types of tomatoes are indeterminate. They grow indeterminately, indefinitely, until they freeze. So if they're in Hawaii, they grow forever, perennials. But in Oklahoma, we're going to lose them in like October or November. So those tomatoes take a little bit longer to start producing tomatoes, but once they do, they just keep spitting them out. So I like to have a mix of both types of tomatoes in our garden. So mostly we do the determinates because we like to do a lot of salsa. It's mostly, I don't really like eating tomatoes just fresh. I like salsas. And then we'll do a couple indeterminates. For peppers, they're even easier to grow than tomatoes. They're all determinate. They don't vine like tomatoes do. Peppers really do well in the heat here in Oklahoma. So we really like growing them. If you're not a fan of peppers already, I suggest you try and eat them. It's one of the things you can eat, you can add to your diet that helps with cancer prevention the most. So the caprice, I can never say it. There's a chemical, thank you. I knew someone would know it. And there's a chemical in peppers that help prevent cancer. So she hated peppers when we first got together, but now she'll eat them just as much as I do. It's an acquired taste, but if you can get used to the heat of it, it'll really help you out. A lot of our peppers too, because we get so many peppers. That's probably the thing that we are overloaded with. We're giving out pounds at a time to friends in the summer. And one way we found to really like preserve that, it was 2 different ways. One is to freeze them. So we have a whole section in the app about preservation and stuff. And with peppers, it's really simple. You just run them through like a food processor, like a Ninja or something like that, seeds and all. And then you lay them out on a cookie sheet with some parchment paper below it, and then stack them in the freezer and put them in the freezer for, I don't know, like a day, something like that.
Yeah, 24 hours.
And then you take them out of there, and then you can just put them in a baggie. The reason why you don't want to just put them like in the freezer in a baggie is because they're all just going to clump together, one big thing. When you put them on the paper, they're just like a bunch of little frozen pepper things. So whenever we make like quesadillas or something like that, then we just grab that bag of frozen peppers out, throw it on the skillet, and let that kind of be the first thing that gets going. We also make a bunch of dried pepper from it. So we just take the peppers and run them through a dehydrator and then run that through a processor. And then we just have a bunch of crushed red pepper basically that we use all throughout the winter. Yeah, so that covers, let's talk about more things in April here. One challenge you're gonna have in Oklahoma is having greens once we get past April. Because spinach, kale, lettuce, those things I talked about earlier don't really like the heat. Kale will survive the heat, but will turn bitter and you're not really gonna wanna eat it as much. So we start switching to some other greens that we start planting around April. So New Zealand spinach is not a spinach at all, but it tastes like spinach. It's a completely different family. It's called Tetragonia is its real name, but New Zealand spinach is kind of its other name, and it does really well in the heat. So it takes like a month for those seeds to germinate, so we get those started early April. That way come May, whenever we really need them, they're already ready to go. Some others, a Malabar spinach too, that climbs. Again, not a spinach at all, but it tastes like it, so it's a good replacement for spinach. Collard greens also do really well in the heat and don't get as bitter as kale does, so we eat a lot of collard greens. Typically with collard greens, we're sauteing those a little bit. So our green strategy changes a little bit from the spring. In the spring, we're pretty much eating all raw spinach and kale and stuff like that. Whereas as it gets a little warmer, we're starting to saute these things a little bit. Like the New Zealand spinach, it's okay, it just doesn't have quite the taste of spinach. So I like to saute it just a little bit. Pretty much everything we saute is with onions and garlic. We haven't talked about those yet. Let me kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about those. Right now is the perfect time to plant onions. The easiest way to plant them is to go to the nursery and buy them in these little bundles that are like 100 little baby onions, and you just plant them one every 2 inches. They're 16 per square, so if you do square foot gardening, it's that. What we typically do with onions is outline our raised beds with them for a couple of different reasons. One, it makes it like easy to harvest them and they're right there. But two, it's almost like we're putting up a layer of defense around our stuff in the middle. Because onions are kind of like rosemary and all this stuff I talked about, and they repel pests, because onions are strongly scented, especially pests that are in the soil. So if we surround the inside of our raised bed with onions, then the idea is that we're creating a buffer, if you will, and helping with pests. Garlic is best planted in the fall, like in November, because it needs to go through at least 30 days, 14 to 30 days of freezing before it'll really grow big. A way that you can kind of hack that, if you want to grow garlic now, is to get like a gallon-sized bag, Ziploc bag, fill it with soil, and then put your garlic cloves in that and put it in the freezer for like 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. Now that plant thinks it went through a winter, pull it out, you plant it, and like, ha-ha, fooled you. And then you get garlic.
That's slightly mean.
I know. Well, I mean, I'm letting it grow, right? I mean, like, tough love.
How long did you say?
2 to 3 weeks. 2 to 3 weeks. Typically, like, we're aiming for 3 weeks and we forget about it, and it's like 2 months later, and then we remember. So that's typically what we end up doing. Okay, so let's talk through more April stuff here. Let me look at my list for a second and see what I might be forgetting. Can you filter by warm season? So we have these filters at the bottom that let you filter by different things. So this can be planted is cool because it shows you everything that can be started indoors or transplanted outside right now. But let's go to warm season and see what all we're missing for. Okay, squash, we haven't talked about that yet. So zucchini is great because you get a ton off of it. The first year, you're going to be like, I love zucchini, it's all I'm going to grow. And then the squash bugs learn where you live. And then the next year, it gets harder because squash bugs are very difficult to handle. They are basically little tanks. Once they're adults, like even if you try and use pesticide, it won't kill them because they're like cockroaches. It doesn't penetrate them. So yeah, you got to smash them. Yeah, so with squash bugs, basically our strategy is a couple of different things. Number one, we are growing our squash vertically. So even our zucchini, I'll plant it next to a T-post and we'll tie it to the T-post as it gets up. The reason for that is squash bugs are able to hide under the plant whenever it's laying on the ground. So hide from a couple different things. Number one, us. So we're always hunting squash bugs. I've got a bounty on them where my kids get a quarter for every squash bug they bring to me. So, and then also birds. Birds eat squash bugs and also other bugs too. So if the plant is up off the ground, they've got a hard time now because they're fighting all of that, right? So that's the first thing to do with squash bugs. Second is companion planting. So surround that with as many companion plants as you can. There's a specific plant, I think it was yarrow, that I learned about in the Oklahoma Gardening channel on YouTube. That is like they were doing trials down at OSU to see what was the best thing for as a repellent, and yarrow was something that did really well. Radish too, daikon radish is another thing you can grow around squash to help. Another thing you can do is cover the squash plant with insect netting until it starts to produce flowers. You need insects to pollinate once there's flowers, you've got to take it off. But at that point, hopefully, the plant has developed enough where it can help fight it off. You just got to check daily. Squash bug eggs are super noticeable. If you go look under the leaves, you can see these things. And then if you get some tape, like some regular tape, masking tape, just put it on the leaves and pull it off, they just come right off. So that's the easiest way we found to get them off. Also lint rollers, we've used those before too. I left it outside though and it got rained on, so that's the problem with lint rollers, I always forget. So also praying mantises. You can buy them on eBay. We did, and now we've got a pretty healthy population of praying mantises that help with that kind of stuff. Or weaver spiders. We have a bunch of them everywhere. And when I find squash bugs, I will throw them I'll feed them to the spider. And it's so like,
Those kind of green, black ones that sit
Yeah,
in the middle of your
yeah,
water.
yeah. So orb
I
weavers,
actually have one.
yeah, they're amazing, and they don't go anywhere. I mean, they build their web, and they stay on that their entire lives, and they eat so many bugs. So, and it's fun. If you take a little coffee can of 20 squash bugs and throw it on it is a sight to see. Because that thing is just like, it's like going through and wrapping them all up. We got a video on our Instagram. Another thing I do, I go video spiders. I have that lens out there set up like an inch away from this spider, and I'm like trying to get the perfect like documentary of it. So anyway, I mean, you've got to think about these bugs as being helpful for you. So spiders, when we find them in the house, we just take them outside. We have a little bug vacuum. It's like, if you're scared of bugs, it's not a big deal. So there's a lot of beneficial insects that can help you. So there's wasps out there that are parasitic, that will lay their eggs at the top of a caterpillar, then they'll hatch and they'll eat the caterpillar from the inside. I know, savage, but man, it's, yeah. And all these things are good for your garden. So we have a section here that shows you how to attract these to your garden. So there's different plants that a lot of these insects like. So if you have them in your garden, they'll find you naturally. This is how we handle our garden without having to use any pesticides. It's a combination of encouraging these bugs, companion planting, and then just going through manually picking stuff off. If things get too bad, we'll have to use a soap spray. It's about as bad as it gets, because the way that soap works is if you spray a bug with it, they can't breathe anymore because they breathe through their skeleton, and that soap encapsulates them and makes it so they can't breathe. So, but it does the same thing to plants too, so you got to be careful. If the temperature gets above 90, you can't do soap anymore. So that's one thing I want to mention, and we have that in here too. So if you go to that soap section, it'll warn you not to do it if it gets too. All right, let's go back to the plant section. It's 11:15, so we'll go 15 more minutes, and then we'll do our activity, and we'll answer questions and all of that kind of stuff. Okay. In addition to zucchini, there's other types of squash too. So there's like spaghetti squash, acorn squash, butternut squash. Those are all vining varieties. Pumpkin is technically a squash. It's a vining variety as well. They're all really easy to grow in Oklahoma as well. Watermelon does really well here in Oklahoma, especially the smaller ones. We really like to grow the small ones because they'll produce a bunch of small ones instead of just 3 big ones. It's more convenient anyway. Just give a watermelon to everyone in the family. Here's your melon. Cantaloupe and muskmelons also pretty easy to grow here. They do not like the cold at all. So really, you're starting those around May. It's going to be all threat of temperatures below 55 are gone at that point, basically. Corn is easy to grow here in Oklahoma. It's a heavy feeder, so you've got to either follow it with beans, or one thing that I think is really cool is this planting method. It's called the Three Sisters planting method. It was pioneered by the Native Americans, where you grow corn all throughout the bed, and then once the corn pops up, you plant bean seeds at the base of the corn, and you plant acorn squash or another type of squash at the corners of the bed. And what happens is the acorn squash, or whatever the squash is, vines through the corn, shades the ground. The beans climb up the corn and then help hold the corn into the ground. It's almost like a stabilizer for the structure, if you will. And then all three of those plants work together because the beans are also feeding the corn because they take nitrogen out of the air and put it down in the soil. So we have a blog post that talks about the Three Sisters method and shows how you can do that. You can also put sunflowers in instead of corn. Speaking of sunflowers, there are 12-foot tall sunflowers that are awesome that we grew. We grew one in a 5-gallon smart pot accidentally because a seed fell in it. I was like, let's go see how it goes. So that was pretty cool. Kids are especially just amazed by a 12-foot tall sunflower. I mean, anyone is. If you see that, it's pretty cool. Okay, let's look through more plants and see what else I might be forgetting. Cilantro, I haven't talked about that yet. I love cilantro, but it's tough to grow in Oklahoma because it does not like the heat at all. So the way that we grow cilantro is basically, we bought a 5-pound bag of it on Amazon a few weeks ago that's the size of our Chihuahua, and I literally just throw seeds everywhere. And I want cilantro just to do what it's going to do when it's going to do it, and we let it go to seed, drop back down. So now we just kind of have wild cilantro everywhere, and whenever it gives us cilantro, we're thankful for it. But it's such a finicky thing, but it does self-seed really well. So if you have like one little raised bed full of cilantro, it'd be great. And when it bolts and goes to seed, take those seeds and eat them because it's called coriander, and it's really good for you, and it tastes incredible, especially when they're like they've just developed. You can put them inside of a wrap, and it adds like a little crunch, and it has that cilantro flavor in it. So So that's the way we're doing cilantro. And then once it hits June, there's no more cilantro at all, and we switch to Vietnamese cilantro or Puerto Rican cilantro. Again, not in the cilantro family at all, but they taste like cilantro, so it's a good replacement. The Puerto Rican cilantro likes the shade, so it's like kind of under stuff. And then the Vietnamese cilantro grows like crazy. It is like a weed here. I think it's in the ragweed family, if I remember right. So it literally is a weed, but it grows really well. Okay, let me look and see. We haven't talked about like lemons and limes and things like that. They can be grown here in Oklahoma, but they don't tolerate our winters. So you've got to move them indoors. So we have all of those in like, again, 25-gallon smart pots that we just move indoors in the winter and then move them back out. Mint. Mint is super evasive. So if you're going to plant mint, make sure it's not in a container with anything else. Let it just take over its own area. We don't eat a lot of mint, but we love to use it in drinks. So I'll take a bunch of mint leaves and put them in water and just let that infuse for a couple hours. And then, especially when it's really hot outside, that will cool you down in a hurry. So, yes?
It'll relax you too.
Yes, it's super relaxing. We do the same thing with lavender. We'll make like a tea from lavender. What are the other things? Catnip is relaxing too. Yeah, and the cats love it. Yeah. Okay, let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, one thing about cats, so we have 3 cats, but to keep them out of our gardens, we have a motion-activated sprinkler that's out there in the middle of the garden. Yeah, so it gets them and me daily.
Aim, fire.
Yeah, every time it scares me because I forget it's there and I walk by and it starts going at me and I'm like, ah, trying to run off. Okay, loofah. You can grow your own loofah sponges, which is pretty cool. Just like literally the sponge you clean with. It's a squash plant and it vines and it produces like 30 or 40 of these things. You can see kind of what it looks like. And then you just let that dry in your garage all winter. And then you just peel it off and it's a loofah. Yeah, it's amazing. You can also eat them when they're really small. We haven't actually eaten them yet though.
We've not tried it yet.
Yeah.
We will this year.
We will. We'll do it this year. Okay, let's briefly show Garden Plus because I want to show that. You were some of the first people to be able to see this. We've been testing it for the past month and a half, and we are really excited to be releasing this. So this is basically our garden right now. Everything that's in our garden we have logged in here, and we're going to log a new plant so we can show you how that goes. So let's tap on Add Plant to Garden, and so the purpose of Garden Plus, just briefly, is we wanted to build something that would let you keep track of your own garden, that would help you log your plants, give you reminders on when to do things, keep your notes, see historical records, and just have a place that can replace your notebook. Because I've always wanted that with our garden, and we wanted to build the thing that we wanted to use ourselves. So this is our first attempt at it. This is coming out. It's in testing now. If you want to try this, just email us or let me know after. We can get your email address and we can add you to our test, to our beta. But this is coming out to everybody in April for sure. So hopefully to be a public test to everybody in March. One last bug I can't figure out that's driving me nuts, but anyway. All right, so we're logging a plant to our garden right now. Let's go to kale and we'll log that we planted that. So if we search for kale, we can grab that and this little button here will let us add it to our garden. So at this point, planting day automatically chooses today. We can choose the starting method. Let's do outdoor by seed. And then amount planted, just do 1 smart pot. You can enter whatever you want here. We didn't lock you down to having to do certain things because everyone does their garden differently. So we wanted to, so planting location, again, this is like whatever you want to enter here. Let's just do backyard or something like that here. And then for the type, you can tap on that and we pull in all the stuff we already know about, but if you have one that we don't have here, you can just enter it there. Let's just choose Prism Hybrid or something here. Okay, so now it's going to show you the estimated seed sprouting date. So this is when that should sprout. It's not always accurate. If we get a freeze that comes in or something, it could delay it, but assuming everything is okay, this is when you should expect it. And this is when you should be able to expect your first harvest. So this is just the tip of the iceberg with what we're building. You're going to see cards here in the future that are going to be when to water next, when to fertilize next. You're going to get notifications shown. And that's what we're in the process of building. You're just seeing the tip of the iceberg here. So if we go to the plant log now, actually stay on here for a second and let's, so once this sprouts, you want to mark that it sprouted, right? So if you tap on that mark as sprouted, that actually will come up with an event for sprouted. You can enter any notes. I don't think you need any notes for this, but let's go ahead and hit save. And now if we go to plant log, we can see that sprouted event and we can add more events. So let's tap add event, and maybe we need to log that we watered, right? So now we can come in here, we can log that we watered and save. Now if you had to go log that you watered every single plant in your garden, that'd be annoying. So let's go back to the main list, and maybe we just watered everything in our garden today. So let's come down here and tap on this button down at the bottom on the right, and now we can do log event for multiple plants. So now we can come in there, we can log watered, select all, and then next. And now we've got that logged for everything. Okay, so let's save that, and let's go back into our kale that we just planted. You can do that sort by planting date. If you're not sure, let's show that for a second. Let's just, it's all right. So let's sort by planted date so we can see one more, and I'll put the most recent stuff on top. Okay, so there's our kale we just planted. This view is going to be changing. We're going to make it so that it groups plants together, and we have this is our first run at it, so it's going to be even easier to find your things here moving forward. Where'd it go?
Uh-oh, what did I do? I pressed something.
Okay, let's tap on that kale, and let's go to the plant log again. We're not gonna, okay, so let's go to plant notes and we'll talk about that. So here you can enter notes for anything that you want to keep about that particular kale plant, or you can take photos. So let's take a photo.
There's romaine lettuce right there.
Yeah, this will work. Fake kale. Okay. And save that. This is where our bug is, so I hope it doesn't show itself right now.
It just takes a minute to load.
If you're on a weak connection, then it takes a second to show and it doesn't have a good loading. That's my last thing I gotta fix. So of course it's gonna happen right now. I promise in a second the picture will show up and then it'll switch it over. But anyway, this is Garden Plus. So this is coming out to everybody in April. If you want to try it out, just email us. We'd love to get it in your hands and see how it works for you. Okay, so we are at 11:24. Let's go ahead and answer any questions. Does anyone have any questions before we do our planting activity or anything maybe you want to know more about? Yes?
Okay, compost, it's gonna take a while, so I
Mhm.
need to get bags. What's your suggestion? I know I'm in Tulsa.
Okay.
And, just wondering about, mushroom compost.
I would just try and get as many different varieties as you can.
Okay.
So I do recommend testing your compost. So all the compost that we use, I've tested heavily in the past. Like Minnick Materials, I've tested all their stuff. The test is really simple. We have a YouTube video and blog post that details it, but it's basically just this. You get 3 little containers that are just regular potting mix you buy from the store. 3 other containers that are half potting mix and half that compost, and you plant pea seeds. And after 21 days, if there's a problem with that compost, you'll see deformations in the leaves on the peas because peas are really sensitive. So you just compare them to their test one. So that's a really easy way to test it. The problem is you gotta wait, and you probably don't wanna wait. But I will say that the reason why we've done all this testing stuff is because the very first year, I got compost from a municipal compost place because it was cheap. It was $10 for a truckload. And what ended up happening that year was all my tomatoes started getting deformations and all these issues, and I could not figure out what was going on. And I went to the head of soil science at OSU, and I took him to him, and he helped me figure out that what had happened was it was herbicide poisoning, because the compost that was being made down at the compost facility, they're accepting scraps from everybody in the community who are bringing their lawn clippings that have all this herbicide on it, and that really wasn't the problem as much as the stuff that was bringing, horse manure, I think ultimately was what got me, because horses were grazing on fields that were sprayed with aminopyrrolid, which is a broadleaf herbicide that lasts 3 years. After it comes out of the horse, it lasts 3 additional years. That's the problem with these chemicals, is they're so strong that they are not breaking down, and they're causing problems way down the line, after they were supposed to. So that was when I learned my lesson. And I stopped getting cheap compost. We started making it ourselves, buying from trusted places, testing it when I bought it. We have a worm bin too that my 3-year-old's in charge of. She's our worm farmer. And it's right outside our kitchen door, and just all of our food scraps go in there. Those worms are workhorses. They make a lot of food for our plants. You can buy worm castings.
Oh, it's back here.
I brought some today too, so you can see that. I was buying some off Craigslist for a while, actually. There's a guy down the south side that has a worm farm operation. But that I was buying like trash bags from. But really, it's so easy just to make yourself. I mean, if you don't want to buy a worm bin, you can just build one out of like a big tote, drill some holes in it, and basically you just throw the worms in there, and they need some bedding, and they need some food. And we have a blog post that goes into detail on all of that, so I'm not going to go into too much on it. But what's that? Yeah, we're looking to move actually this summer out to the country with an acreage so we can have chickens. Right now we're in Moore and there's an ordinance against chickens. I say let's go for it, but but anyway, so we're moving out to an acreage in the summer, and we're going to do the Joel Salatin method, where you rotate through goats and chickens and pigs and all of it like around, and then you grow behind them. So I'm going all in on that. So.
Just don't get roosters and they'll never know.
Oh, that's what I said. I know. Don't get me started. I think if we all try and convince her right now, maybe. But we're moving, so it's okay.
So,
Yes.
I've got a greenhouse and I've sprouted some cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower, but they've grown so tall and they still haven't formed any heads. I was going to transplant them outside to the garden. Can I bury that stalk, or will it just rot?
It depends on the plant. Some plants don't like to be buried at all. For most part, most things, because that's where they're getting the bulk of their oxygen, and that's also where their sensors are, is at the base of the plant. So when that's basically their brain is right there. So it's really, I mean, did they get too leggy? Was that the problem? Or they just got too tall before they start producing the leaves?
They just grow up and
Yeah.
lots of leaves and no fruit. So
Yeah.
no heads.
I wouldn't bury them too much. On trees, it really matters and stuff like that. On plants, a little less, but yeah, typically it's not a good idea to bury anything too much. Now, there are some differences. Like tomatoes produce roots everywhere along the plant. Anywhere it's buried will make roots. So those you can bury as deep as you want. There's a couple exceptions, but for the most part, you don't want to bury anything too much deeper than the actual. And we're early enough in the season, you could just start those outside over again, right? I mean, just directly in the ground outside. Any other questions on any? Yes?
Do you have any recommendations for keeping chickens out of stuff?
So I haven't had to deal with chickens yet, but I can tell you what we're going to be doing is chicken tractors. So these tractors where you can move them around. But as far as like how to keep chickens out of a bed, I don't know. I haven't had to fight chickens yet. I don't know how they'd feel about a motion activated sprinkler. They probably wouldn't care.
That is good luck.
Yeah.
You got like a small window where they'll eat only just the bugs, but then you have to shoo them out, and then they'll get everything else.
Yeah. We're just going to do chicken tractors and chicken tunnels. So we'll have, between our gardens, we'll have paths that have tunnels over them that the chickens can go through. That way they can weed the bugs out of that area. And then we'll have chicken tractors we move around. Again, if you search for Joel Salatin, his farming methods are basically, I'm going to follow exactly what he does, because I've read a lot of different stuff and everything points back to him. And I think his rotational methods are pretty pioneering, and I think it's the way to build like a sustainable farm, which is our goal. We want to have a sustainable farm with goats and chickens and a pet cow. We can't eat the cow, she won't let me, but a pet buffalo. We're going to have a pet buffalo. It's going to be a whole ordeal.
What was his last name?
Joel Salatin, Salatin. And he's just an interesting guy.
Exactly, right?
Any other questions? Yes?
What do you have advice about keeping like seedlings alive, or not letting them like just like, collapse?
Indoors or outdoors?
Indoors.
So the first thing is make sure the light is close enough to it. Like you've got to have that light really, really close to the plant, and that'll keep them from getting super leggy. Because that's what happens is they get too tall and they fall over, and now because they were searching for light too much. So try and put the light as close as possible. A lot of people try and start plants on a windowsill or something like that. There's usually not enough light to do that. You really need to have like, a grow light. Now we bought a light for our living room for our aloe vera right now that's like, it's like a 3-arm light. You know those like lights are just in your living room, they're like 3 arms sticking off? They have that are grow lights. So we have those for aloe vera in our living room, and that's working great. So you could just get something like that. Another thing you can do is right now, you can just move those things outdoors during the day, bring them back in at night, because the temperatures are perfect for broccoli outside right now. Now tomatoes and peppers, you wouldn't want to do that because they don't like anything below 55. So, I mean, today'd be fine. But if you're anything like me, you'll forget that they're out there, like I did with these plants. I left them outside, but they were pretty able to handle it. So. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you have a farmer's market that you recommend?
Farmer's market. So I used to go to the OSU one, but they moved, or they shut it down, and I think everyone that was there pretty much dispersed over to the
The
The-
Scissortail Park one?
No, they went to the one that was at the place they had the fights. It's like I think it's called the farmers market.
Isn't that next to the
Yeah,
train
yeah.
tracks?
Yes, yeah.
The one next to the train tracks?
So there's that one. Scissortail is going to be having a farmers market this year too, I believe. I know Bill Ferris is going to be down there, and he's probably my favorite person to buy plants from, especially herbs. Prairie Wind Nursery is the name of his nursery down in Norman. But he's going to be at the Scissortail Farmers Market, so I think that is a good one. The Moore Farmers Market at Central Station down there in Moore is where I bought my tomatoes and peppers the past couple of years. Pretty much every community. Norman has a good farmers market too that we've been to. Mustang has a farmers market. Choctaw, if you're out in that area.
Edmond has one too.
there's
I've
a-
been to one up there.
Edmond, there's a place called Conscious Community up in Edmond that is it's kind of a farmer's market. It's Providence Farms, it's their operation. It's all different sets of vendors, and it's like a full-time thing. It's like every day they're open. So yeah, there's pretty much every community has a good resource.
It's fun just Saturday morning just to go to all of them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All right, any other questions? And we'll, if not, we'll go ahead and get started planning. So everyone in front of you you should have a 3-gallon Smart Pot. And today, you're going to be able to plant your own greens. So we have a box of lettuce up here. If you would rather plant whatever seed you got over there, you can go ahead and do that. If you'd rather wait and not have to carry a thing of soil, we completely understand. Not going to hurt our feelings. But if you would like to, we're going to go ahead and do this together. And it's really simple. And then we have a contest immediately after. We're going to give away a couple more Smart Pots.